We are back with Bethany Temple of the Justice House of Prayer and Kris Mineau of the Massachusetts Family Institute. And in our previous segment, we were talking about controversy, even within Christian ranks, regarding how to best win the hearts of this nation and bring it back to godly principles. And my point was that sometimes as we present this clear biblical stance, there's a whole sector of American Christianity that thinks that this is too put-offish, too controversial, and that rather than winning the hearts of people and showing that winsome side of Christianity, of love and tolerance and patience and frailty and transparency and so on and so forth, we are really putting a barrier before people and not allowing them to enter into the kingdom and see what we really are all about. Besides that, I think a lot of people are saying, hey, the Christian church has a lot of stuff that they need to take care of as well. And they need to put their own house in order. Issues of divorce and pornography and sexual abuse and physical abuse. And, we're not talking about these issues as well. We just seem to be concentrated on homosexuality and on abortion and so on and so forth. And, how do you handle these things? How do you present the real side of Christianity and also at the same time retain godly principles? So how do you guys handle that? I mean, I know you are the object of a lot of accusation that you're just a culture warrior out there, fighting for all these issues and not winsome enough, not loving enough, that you're presenting a face of Christianity that's really not very attractive. Kris, how do you see yourself and how do you see the work of MFI in the light of that?
I think I'm quite winsome myself.
I believe so completely. That's why I love you as my friend and
but you're right. Christian. We can't be bomb throwers and denigrate people, marginalize people. As we say, we have to speak the truth in love, but we have to speak the truth. We can't compromise on the truth. Now, we in Massachusetts in particular are in a post-Christian culture, whereas before you could say it is written and people would pay attention.
There's other issues now.
Yeah, now if we say it is written, they say you're out of here. Separation.
You close the door to conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we have to engage this thing in a sociological manner, but based on the proven values that are the very best for humanity, for families, for social, for culture in general. Presenting the gospel, but without having to preach chapter and verse. Mm-hmm. And particularly in our mission is to be effective salt out there to prevent this thing from becoming more decadent, because the church has lost ground tremendously in Western civilization, as we said earlier, in the last 30, 40 years, and particularly Massachusetts being such a bellwether for it. We have tremendous influence around the rest of as Winthrop said, the eyes of the world are upon us. That was 350 years ago.
They still
almost
are.
400, and they still are, particularly in these radical social experiments that we've been engaging in the past decade. And of course, the ultimate warning is that if we fail in the mission that God has given us, we'll become a byword of to the world. And unfortunately, a lot of places I go to, when I say I'm from Massachusetts, people do a double take, or start making comments about, oh, really? Well, because that's not the way it's supposed to be. That's not what God...
Are there Christians in Massachusetts still?
Yes. Well, we're an endangered species. We're an unreached people group.
A lot of people feel that way about New England as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But nonetheless, we've got to be engaging, we've got to be winsome, but we can't compromise. Mm-hmm. And too often, the church has retracted behind the four walls of the church, and we're either afraid or we're intimidated or we don't want to be offensive. Jesus was offensive at times. He called Herod that old fox. He wasn't too kind to the money changers in the temple. So there's a time and a place for it. I haven't tipped over too many tables at the State House lately.
Not yet.
Not yet. But we John the Baptist told it like it was, and we still need to do that. That's what the
and what about the charge, though, that this conservative brand of Christianity is not concerned enough about the poor, about the inner city, about issues of social justice, and not enough acknowledging of the dark side of Christianity and our own dirty laundry that we are not airing as well. The fact, for example, that the rate of divorce among Christians is not too different than the rate of divorce out there, on and on and on. So these issues, how do you answer that part of the whole thing? I mean, they're saying, well, why don't you present that other side as well? And I think I know the answer, but I want to give you the opportunity to make the argument yourself.
Well, first of all, we have to deal when there's sin in the camp. We have to deal with it, and we have to be honest. Yes, the church, Christianity, is in trouble regarding the sanctity of marriage and human sexuality, the sanctity of life, abortion. Now we're being challenged with assisted suicide referendums in our state. So it goes on
Which
and on.
Which has been predicted all along, that this is a slippery slope.
As this
culture, expands in all these kinds of issues,
and the more the
further away you get from
Christian values, and the more the church withdraws, the vacuum is filled.
The more sinister that force becomes.
With another spirit, and it's not the spirit of Christ. But again, you did bring up about true biblical social justice, not political social justice, but true biblical social justice. We have to do it. We have to feed the poor, clothe the naked. We have to rescue those that are facing death, like babies, like those that are at the end of life.
Well, here's a question for you, Bethany, because you are associated with a ministry that is very involved in the whole abortion struggle. Lou Engle, who is a kind of a patriarch of a lot of the stuff that you represent, has been deeply involved in fighting for the unborn. And I know he's had a national profile and a very controversial figure as well.
Yeah.
And you identify with a lot of those values, and yet you're doing something that is very interesting. You've taken a kind of a different iteration of that issue of abortion, at least from the conservative Christian side, and you're doing something that I find very interesting. Would you tell us a little bit about that, and how do you see some of that answer to the people who say, well, you Christians, you conservative Christians are just concerned about the moral, the obvious moral issues, but you're not doing enough to be part of the solution. You're throwing stones out there at the culture, but what are you doing to solve the problem and
I think
be a part of the solution?
Even more in a broad sense, like that statement as far as throwing stones at culture, or I guess the way I actually see it completely differently. And I actually think it addresses what you were saying about what about the issues of the church. And I think Kris would agree with this, is that number one, I know our focus, and I think even a lot of MFI, it's actually they're calling the church to be salt and light. And it really goes back to, and I can say our posture in prayer and even preaching or being a witness on campuses is sinners are supposed to sin. Like, sinners aren't the problem. I mean, somebody that is lost and has not encountered the transforming power and love of Jesus Christ, they are left to themselves. They are ensnared. Girls that are having abortions, they are not the problem. Ultimately, they've been misinformed. They've been given options. I mean, we've actually created a completely sexualized culture. So, I mean,
we set them up for these kinds of things because of all these other values.
So
and then
when we're praying for the ending of abortion, when we're praying for the homosexual community, there is no judgment, hate, condemnation. There is no ill in our heart. What it is it's understanding 9 out of 10 times when the homosexuals that I've ministered to, they've been sexually abused. It's healing that's needed. It's restoration. And that, I think that's at the very heart of intercession and the conservative kind of people that look like we're throwing stones. The heart is really after, I guess it depends on how you define love. Because if people feel as though that to speak truth or even to fight for truth, that it's not loving, then that definition of love will cause you to say, well, you're not loving because you're speaking truth. But if you define love as
false dichotomy, that's what they call it.
I'm compelled because I love, I want you to hear truth, and I believe there's a better way.
Hold that thought. Let's take a very brief break, and I want you to continue exactly where you are and keep developing that thought a little bit more. So let's take a moment, and we'll be back right away.